Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you. Happy Friday. I brought someone along today that has made me feel good and not scared and brave for pretty much most of my life. And his name is Butterscotch. Butterscotch is my favorite teddy bear. My grandma gave him to me when I was maybe 6 years old, and you can see he is very loved. Do you have a favorite teddy bear or other stuffy? So why don't you go run, put us on pause, and go get your favorite stuffy, and they can join us for this chapter of Tuesdays at the Castle. Does that sound good? All right, go ahead. I'll get the book out. Chapter 3. It was a Tuesday, and Celie was waiting to see what the castle would do. Her parents had been gone nearly 2 weeks, and things had settled into a routine, with Rolf taking on whatever minor royal duties he could, Lila in charge of the servants, and Celie working on her atlas. Their parents had left on Thursday, and other than Celie's discovery of the little turret with the spyglasses at each window, the castle hadn't done much. The next Tuesday had been 14-year-old Rolf's first day hearing petitions, and there had not been any problems of a castle-based nature. On the other hand, all the villagers, farmers, and shepherds for miles around had come to present their land disputes and water disputes and family grievances, hoping that Rolf would rule in their favor out of naivete. That means by not being smart because he's so young. Some people brought out issues that King Glower had already ruled on, slyly looking for a different outcome, and even tried to invent disasters, floods, goat pox epidemics, so that the crown would give them money in exchange. Despite his son's youth, however, there was a very good reason why King Glower had paid attention when the castle had showed a preference for Rolf over Bran. Rolf was not stupid. He had been sitting in the throne room by his father's side since he was a small child, and he knew most of the people who lived in the valley. For instance, Rolf remembered that Osric Swan had been paid handsomely to rebuild his mill after the last flood, and knew there hadn't been another flood since. He knew that Pogue Perry got into a fight with someone nearly every week, that it was almost always Pogue's fault, and that there was no earthly reason for the crown to be involved. He knew that Delco Ross's goats were often thin and sickly, but that was because Delco Ross was a skinflint and barely fed them enough to keep them alive. Oh, poor goats. Master Ross, kindly go home and feed your livestock some oats, Rolf said to the sour-faced man. The crown has already paid you on a number of occasions for their medical expenses. If you have not used that money on yourself, I recommend you use it on them. He casually reached one hand under the throne and poked Celie. She slapped his hand away. She was crouching under the box-like seat of the throne while she sketched the hallway that led from the servants' quarters to the throne room. The door to it was hidden by a tapestry behind the throne on this end, and inside a broom closet at the servants' end. It took a number of twists and turns, and occasionally sprouted doors to other rooms. She had promised the housekeeper that she would map it out and make copies for some of the newer maids. It was the fastest way to the throne room, but you had to follow it straight, or you would end up in the library or Lila's room, which was fine, except on Mondays when the throne room needed to be cleaned. The housekeeper didn't like the idea of new maids getting lost and wandering off who knows where. Now what? Rolf barely bothered to keep the irritation out of his voice. Several of the petitioners from last week were back with the same problems, and Rolf had whispered to Celie earlier that they must think him terribly stupid to petition him all over again. Just wondering, Your Highness, if Princess Delilah is at home, said Pogue Perry. Seeley would recognize his voice anywhere. Pogue was easily the handsomest young man in Glower Valley, which was presumably why he ended up in so many fights. All he had to do was look at a girl, and she would completely forget her beau and run after Pogue. Even Seeley wasn't immune to his smiles and poked her head out from under the throne to grin at him. Pogue winked at her. "Hello there, Princess Cecilia. Want to help me find your lovely, lovely sister?" "No, she doesn't," Rolf said crossly, "and Lila's busy. Next." "I might have another issue to discuss," Pogue said lazily. "If it concerns either of my sisters, the answer is no," Rolf said. Pogue smiled his mischievous grin, and Seeley found herself sighing a little. She clambered out from under the throne, her bundle of papers in hand. She was done making a master map of the passageway. Now all that remained was to copy it a few times. "I'll take you to Lila," she said. Nobody but Pogue or very elderly courtiers called Seeley's sister by her full name. It was as if Pogue savored the name. Seeley made a mental note to ask her parents why. They would be home that night, or the next day at the latest. "Your parents should be home soon," Pogue said, startling her as his words echoed her thoughts. "Yes, we expect them at any minute, really," Seeley replied, leading him down a long passageway. If they turned right and took the next flight of stairs, they should end up near the small dining hall, where Lila would be overseeing the table setting for dinner. The counselors of finance and public works would be joining them that night. "I like your parents," Pogue said unexpectedly. She goggled at him. "You have to," she pointed out. "They're the king and the queen." "I don't have to," Pogue said with a quick grin. "I just have to respect them." "Not even that. All one really has to do is obey royalty. But I like them all the same. If you ever need anything, you know where my father's shop is, don't you?" "Of course, he's the only blacksmith in the village," Seeley said. Something about this conversation felt strange. Not that Pogue wasn't sincere, just the opposite. And that was part of it. Pogue was never sincere, or at least he was never serious. He usually just teased. "Good girl," he said, and tweaked one of her curls. They had reached the small dining room and could see Lila through the doors, ordering around a footman with a chair. "Oh, fair Delilah," Pogue went down on one knee, and Seeley left him to flirt and Lila to flutter. She took the map to her room and carefully copied it 5 times. Then she went to the housekeeper's sitting room and delivered the copies to Madame Housekeeper, as everyone called her. Seeley had kept the mastery copy to add to her own atlas, and on her way to her room, she began to muse about how many pages it might be when it was finally completed. But how could she ever finish? The castle grew new rooms every week, and occasionally got rid of others that were no longer used. Already there was a series of closets in her maps that were now gone, since the linens of Madame Housekeeper had kept in them and had been eaten by moths. Real quick, we've got a lot of little dogs behind us tonight, so I bet you just saw Rocco jump up. "Someone should help me," Seeley muttered, "but no one else seems to care. They just shrug and say that the castle does what it does, and maybe the castle really was doing what it wanted," she finally realized. And to her, she'd been aiming for her room, but instead found herself at the foot of the stairs that led to the tower with the 4 spyglasses. It was as if the castle had turned the corridors around to lead her there. "Fine, then," she agreed and went up to the little room. Nothing had changed. Seeley set her notebook and pencil case on the table and looked around. There was the rope, the biscuits, the book, and the spyglasses mounted on the windowsills. She took a moment to stretch the room and made notes about where she had found it both times. Then she went to one of the spyglasses and peered through. She could see the main road and hovering over it a plume of dust that signaled the approach of someone traveling toward the castle at top speed. She squinched her face and tried to look harder. Was that her parents' carriage? And if that was their carriage, where was the luggage cart? The attendant soldiers on their horses? Seeley found a ring on the spyglass that adjusted the view and toyed with it until the vehicle in the dust cloud came into better focus. It was the royal carriage, but it was unaccompanied by luggage or soldiers and moving far too fast for comfort. This was not right. Seeley raced back the way she had come and burst into the throne room, where she skidded to a halt amid the curious gaze of the petitioners and the amused look of her brother. He clearly wanted a break and looked expectantly at her as she straightened her skirts and hair. "In a rush, Seal? I need to talk to you," she said, hurrying over to the throne. "In private, right now." "Oh, thank heavens," Ralph muttered. "A 5-minute break, everyone," he announced. They ducked through a door behind a tapestry of a sea serpent and into the small study their father often used to meet with his council. Refreshments had been set out on the table there, and Ralph started to pour a glass of water before he saw her expression and froze. "What is it?" "I found a room with a spyglass and was looking at the road. I can see the carriage coming, but it's moving awfully fast and there aren't any soldiers with it, or luggage." She said it all in a rush. "What? Are you sure it's the carriage? Mother and Father's carriage?" "Yes," Seeley said. Only now she wasn't so sure. True, it was a large carriage, but there were probably dozens like it in the kingdom. She hadn't actually seen the royal crest on the doors. It was too dusty for that. What if she made a fuss and she was wrong? "You'd better show me," Ralph said. Seeley always appreciated the fact that her brother treated her like an equal. She just hoped that she wasn't abusing his trust now, as she guided him to the foot of the winding stair that led to the spyglass tower, as Seeley had dubbed it in her head. Up here, Ralph took the stairs 2 at a time despite his robes of state, and was soon peering through the south-mounted spyglass at the road. "You're right. That's their carriage," Ralph said. "It just passed through the village, which means it should be here in a minute. We'd better go down to meet it." It was a matter of minutes before they were in the courtyard. Ralph sent a servant to find Lila while he and Seeley paced up and down the cobblestones. They didn't have to wait very long. Lila arrived at the same time as the carriage, which came barreling through the main gate and lurched to a halt just a few paces away. The horses were lathered and blowing, and the carriage was filthy and battered. "Is that an arrow?" It was Pogue who asked. He'd come with Lila, of course, and was the only one of them who could speak, because there was an arrow stuck in the carriage door. In fact, several arrows studded the carriage, and now that the horses had stopped, Seeley noticed that one of them was a gray, while the rest were the chestnut preferred by the king. So they'd had to replace one of the horses somewhere along the way. "Mummy?" Seeley took a hesitant step toward the carriage, but Lila pulled her back. The door crashed open and a man half fell out. It was one of the royal guard. No, it was their sergeant. He was streaked with dirt and blood, and his left arm hung in a sling made out of a silk scarf, one of the queen's silk scarves. "Your Highness," he said when he saw Ralph, and straightened with an effort. "I mean, Your Majesty." He bent his head stiffly. "I regret to inform you that King Glower, your father, is dead." "And Mummy?" Seeley's voice was so small, she wondered if he had heard her. He had. "I regret to say that Her Majesty is dead as well." The end of chapter 3. Ooh, I can't wait to get to chapter 4 with you tomorrow